And a warm welcome from me, David Foster, to this Roundtable. Is it just a fear of pretty much everything Chinese right now, or is it possible that a video sharing app that its owners say is there to inspire creativity and bring joy really is a worldwide threat? The dangers of TikTok, if there are any. They'll be stealing your personal data and giving it to the Chinese authorities, say the doom-mongers. President Trump is thinking of banning it. India already has, and Indonesia did it for a while. But perhaps more than 500 million people use TikTok. And they say, what's there to be afraid of?
Hundreds of millions of people have downloaded TikTok around the globe, and many governments are concerned about the role a Chinese-owned app plays in our lives. It has been banned in India, the app's biggest overseas market, where it is considered to be a national security threat. There's also concern in Australia, the UK and US as to whether TikTok's parent company ByteDance shares data with the Chinese government. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said a ban was something the US was looking at. When asked if he would download TikTok, his response was, "Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party." A lot of how TikTok works is obscure, from its data storage to its algorithm. TikTok says its US data is stored in the US, with backup in Singapore. A ban in America could have a catastrophic impact on the company. TikTok is trying its best to distance itself from Beijing. It withdrew the app from Hong Kong because of new Chinese national security laws that crack down on pro-democracy protesters in an attempt to show it doesn't have links to the Chinese government. But the company has repeatedly refused to attend US congressional hearings. So does TikTok have something to hide, and is it a threat to global security?
Let us welcome to Roundtable Zak Doffman, Chief Exec and founder of Digital Barriers. He's in London. Esther Naylor is a research assistant in the International Security Programme at Chatham House. She joins us from York in the UK. And Peter Micek, General Counsel at Axis. Now, he's in New York for us. And a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I don't normally start with a quote, but I'm going to on this occasion. US Congressman Ken Buck. This is what he had to say about TikTok. The Chinese Communist Party is using TikTok to collect massive amounts of data from American citizens and our government that could be used in a cyber attack against our republic. The clock is ticking. Now, I'm going to ask you in order, starting at the top, a very short question to which I would expect and hope a very short answer will come. Yes, no, or maybe. Starting with you, Zak, is TikTok a national security threat?
It's complicated.
Esther?
Maybe.
Peter?
Possible.
Okay, well, let's go back to Zak on this one. Complicated in what sense? Is it just about how the Chinese government, if it gets its hands on the information, uses data that users provide?
Yeah, we need to go back to the top. TikTok is a social media platform, and social media platforms collect a lot of data. And TikTok's defense to the allegations that are being made is it doesn't do anything that other social media platforms don't do. So on that level, it's not a threat, but it's owned by the Chinese government. And clearly there is the risk that the Chinese may push TikTok into doing something with that data or pushing information across its platform. That's why it's complicated. And the debate at the moment is focused in the wrong place.
Okay, well, go back to 2017. I'll come to you, Esther. We'll do it in order again. And China's national intelligence law, which requires organizations and citizens to, quote, support, assist, and cooperate with the state intelligence work. In other words, if ByteDance, which owns TikTok, is told to hand over information to the Chinese government, it has to do so.
Exactly. And the TikTok have responded to these allegations, saying that although it has to comply with this law, that its US data is in the jurisdiction in Singapore, and the data for EU customers is being overseen by a team in the EU, and the data for the UK customers will be overseen by a team based in the UK. So it's trying to distance itself from the possibility of having to pass over data from the Chinese to the Chinese government. However, it is unclear whether it is in the future going to be obliged to pass over this data.
Yeah, because the Chinese would say that, wouldn't they? TikTok would say that, wouldn't it?
Exactly, and I think that the only way for the company to even further distance itself is potentially be acquired by an American company or a non-Chinese parent company, because at the moment ByteDance is a Chinese company and is subject to Chinese controls and Chinese law.
Peter, possibly, you say?
It's possible. There is evidence that we haven't seen, but it's on the government to make its case, and neither the US nor the UK government have done that so far. In the court of public opinion, we're left with nothing more than the fact that this social media company and this app is collecting way too much data under very vague terms, following in the footsteps of Facebook and pretty much all the other social media apps that we use. So in that sense, the security threat is a bit overblown in my view. Without seeing more, it's simply a case of this enterprising company following the footsteps of what Silicon Valley companies have done before. And if we're talking about government surveillance, while there's plenty of rumors about Chinese government access to data held in China or by Chinese companies, there are facts on the table about overbearing and unlawful US government surveillance, and those revelations that came out in 2013 really have not been responded to or addressed adequately.
Let's throw this open to all three of you again. It's always great to see your faces, so I'm going to ask if we can keep them up on screen. I can see how you're reacting. Esther, to you first of all. So why all the bile directed from certain sources at TikTok? Pure jealousy?
I think that it has become embroiled in the latest geopolitical tech row. So if we look at the situation in India, India has announced, I think yesterday, a new suite of apps owned by Chinese companies which are banned. And this represents an increasing desire to for states and for countries to exert more control over the development of the internet. There are also questions about whether it would benefit in the US if TikTok was banned. It would benefit the competition because I think it's around 40 million US users, around 800 million users globally. This is a big player in the viral video content sharing domain.
Gosh, well, it's gone up since I last looked at the figures. I thought it was around about 500 million. If it's 800 million, that is extraordinary. And I think 150 million in India, where it's been banned. Okay, let's talk about jealousy. Let's talk about competition. Another quote going up on the screen. This from Ryan Kavanagh, co-owner of TikTok's competitor called Triller. It does bother me when I hear people say it's political. Literally, as you peel it back, I mean, and these are professionals who do this, it's just spyware, like it's spyware with a social media thing wrapped around it. Zach, is it spyware?
Well, all social media is spyware in a way, because that's how they monetize their user base. So TikTok, as will Facebook and all the rest, will pick up information on you, both from the device on which you're using the application, but also your behavior while you're using the app, what you like, what you dislike, what you watch, who your friends are, what you say to those friends. So on that basis, the amount of information that any platform collects is huge and is very invasive, and that's just the domain. And candidly, if Facebook was Chinese, it would have been banned a long time ago, because the information it collects is far more invasive than TikTok does. But to the allegation that somehow all of this information is being gathered into a great big soup of data and sent to Beijing, that's unproven. And that is TikTok's greatest defense. And those that are making the allegations are doing themselves no favors, because they are shifting the target from what they should be focusing on, which is whether they want an adversarial state to have their application on 800 million devices across all of the countries which they compete with and potentially have defense issues with, and the ability to push information, targeted information to those people.
I suppose you could say, sorry, may I just interrupt? You could say it's unproven, perhaps because somebody wants to keep it hidden. They're just being clever.
You could absolutely say that, but let's be clear. If there was a smoking gun with TikTok, it would have been found. It would be nigh on impossible for it to be picking up this amount of information as alleged, sending it to Beijing, and nobody had been able to prove that. But what they're doing today doesn't mean they won't do something different in the future. And again, need to look at the semantics of it. As I think was said before, TikTok have gone out and said, look, if they were asked to send information on an individual to Beijing, they would say no. But as to the allegation, are they collecting information and drawing inferences from that information and providing those conclusions to Beijing? Who knows, right? So you can tell a lot about a society based on all of the individuals of a certain age in New York. They like certain things. They have certain political leanings. They may be persuaded by certain events or certain elements of news flow. This disinformation, misinformation allegation is much harder for TikTok to disprove, because that goes to the proprietary algorithm.
I mean, by all means, anybody say anything at any time, but does this simply come down to lobbying by those companies, perhaps such as Triller, and I'm not saying specifically it could be then, but other companies that don't want to see, and this one can go to you, Peter, anybody else can jump in, please do. They don't want to see other companies doing particularly well. It's not so much political, because the Trump administration, the legislators believe it right to be clamping down perhaps on TikTok. It's because they're being asked to do so by competitors.
I wouldn't put it past the Trump administration to drum up anti-China sentiment right now. We've seen with the response to the coronavirus as well, plenty of that. And furthermore, the Trump administration has drawn a lot of battle lines with Silicon Valley itself. We'll see actually many of the leading Silicon Valley business leaders in Congress tomorrow answering questions. And so I wouldn't say it's such a cozy relationship between the administration and the social media firms right now. And I do think that China is just a really convenient target.
Yeah, but perhaps it suits both sides.
That's right. I think that might be right. And it's really unfortunate if, the result of this is that we're left between two internets, or forced to choose, between apps and services, not based on what's best for, in my organization's view, the human rights of the users at risk, and others view what's best for the consumers, but instead, what's most convenient for geopolitical purposes. That would be a shame.
You're all far too polite. Who wants to say something next?
I will point out something, I think, to your question. I think you need to draw a clear distinction between what's happening in India and what's happening in the US. In India, absolutely, there will be lobbying from the Indian tech community and apps to compete with TikTok, which is the largest. India is TikTok's largest market. It makes a huge amount of money there. And we've already seen a huge pushback in India against Chinese technology, Chinese apps. So even the leading Chinese phone manufacturers try and brand themselves as made in India when they're targeting that market. I don't think there are parallels with Silicon Valley lobbying Trump in the US. I actually would venture that Silicon Valley don't want to see Trump sanctioning TikTok, because that would be getting a bit too close to home for the likes of Facebook and Google and others that don't want political interference in social media. I think Facebook would argue that it's quite capable of taking care of itself, and if it wants to compete with TikTok, as it's doing with Reels, it has an unlimited budget to do so. So I think you need to break down what we've seen in terms of this global pushback against TikTok and look at the constituent parts. What's going on in the US is clearly geopolitical. It's part of the tech standoff between America and China. What's going on in India is much more regional and has been going on for some time now.
We'll get into in just a moment what it means to the users, if there is some kind of ban, and where they might be forced to go for other things. In fact, whether it makes any difference at all. But Esther, let me put this one to you. Cambridge Analytica in the UK had plenty of information which it used, it is suggested, to influence British votes. Now, the same could be said about this. If TikTok gets hold of an awful lot of data, it could use that propaganda, it could push propaganda to users who use these platforms as their primary source of news. It could influence events.
Exactly, and I think the situation with Cambridge Analytica, it was a third party and worked with Facebook, and the revelations of that, has that really damaged Facebook? Probably not. It's still a big player. It has led to a conversation around the power of tech companies, and I think that the situation in the US with the potential of banning of TikTok, it is pointing at the relationship between regulators and tech companies, and a full ban is proposed by the US, not necessarily a regulation or holding the company to account, trying to increase trust between the users, but a full ban, because the US government knows how powerful these companies are and the potential to spread misinformation and to influence things such as elections, and its election season coming up in the US. So it's unsurprising that this has been put on the table and reached such a high point at this time.
Peter, do you want to respond to that? And then we'll go into, with all of us, the idea of what difference is it going to make. Well, I don't use it, so it will make no difference to me, but what difference it might make to those people who love it. Peter, do you want to respond to what Esther's just been saying?
Sure. I think that really resonates. First, the people who are using this often are young people and really creative, innovative internet users. And this app is allowing them to share content globally. And in our view, any app that increases kind of global communication and channels has potential for good, so long as there's the proper safeguards in place. And while much of the harm we talk about, especially in election season, is around misinformation, around manipulation of viewpoints and opinions, what is at the nut of that harm is the violation of our data protection rights and our data privacy, because that's how any manipulation can be effective, is by building on profiles that take in all sorts of information about us and about our communities, and then using that to commodify, to monetize, and then weaponize information back at us.
Yeah, but may I just say, just because a person carries a pocket knife to get stones out of horses' hooves, they're being great citizens of the world, doesn't mean it can't be used for the wrong purposes.
It can, and like any other app, and that's what we should take away from the Cambridge Analytica stories, is not how evil, this a few folks are who had the bright idea to exploit Facebook data. It's the fact that the data existed as a honeypot and was available for exploitation, and that's why we need across-the-board data protection rules and regulations in the U.S. as elsewhere.
Surely, if I give my data out, I know. Yes, please carry on. I'll put the question in just a moment.
And just add on that, it's very clear from the privacy policy that at the very end, the TikTok outlines how data privacy, the policy will vary in different jurisdictions. And at the moment, in the US, there is the California Consumer Privacy Act, but that is not a federal-wide minimum standard of data protection for US users. In India, there is the ban comes against the backdrop of an increasing desire for the government to control data produced in India. There is, there's talks about data sovereignty and data localization, and this particular, whether TikTok is a threat to national security, to echo the things that Peter has said, this is an opportunity for the government and for other governments to think about how it can protect users' data and hold companies to account.
Isn't it, Zach, we'll come to you for this one, but isn't it a matter of two sides here weighing up different interests? If I go on there and give them my data, I know that they're going to use it in some way or another, or I don't really care because I want to be able to use it. It's a price I'm prepared to pay. And on the other hand, you have the authorities who say, hang on, this could come back to hurt us.
Yeah, so look, the data that TikTok currently collects from a largely young user base is of little consequence if it's picked up. It would be of little value to Beijing. What would be of value to Beijing would be pushing a particular angle on, say, the origins of coronavirus and the allegations of misinformation in December and January to that audience, because it then starts to populate and popularize its particular angle in the story. And it would be almost impossible to work out whether something like that is taking place. And secondly, if you look at Facebook and you go back 10 years, Facebook didn't do most of what it does today. So once TikTok's on 800 million, a billion phones, it can clearly expand its scope of services. So the data it's collecting today, the service it provides today to that user base might be as nothing compared to what it will do unchecked in 5 years' time.
But if I'm a TikTok user and all I'm thinking about is, do I enjoy it or do I not? I'm not going to really be that bothered, am I, about what might happen 5 years down the line? Is it going to make any difference to me if it's banned, other than the fact that I might not be able to get hold of it because I could find something else just the same?
No, Snapchat and Instagram tells you that at 12 months post any regulation, something will have filled the gap. There's already lots of talk in India, tens of millions of downloads of competing applications. For Instagram is launching Reels next month in the US, so that will pick up the slack. And it's not going to be banned. It's going to be sanctioned. It will be on an entity list. It will be restricted. It's the flavor of the month or the year. It's soared under lockdown. In 3 years' time, with checks and balances in place, potentially something else will have picked up the slack.
Yeah, it's a little bit like nettles in my garden, Esther, isn't it? I mean, no matter how many you pull up, how many you try to sideline, get rid of, something else very similar is going to take its place.
Yes, and you have to remember that actually there was, prior to TikTok, it was an app called Musical.ly, which, same concept. And prior to that, there was an app called Vine, again, viral content sharing. So these things come and go in waves, as Zak has said. And I think that the individual TikTok user probably, would see this less as a security threat and more, why is a government banning an app which, people can make livelihoods and people can generate a huge amount of income. But as with these trends, there will be something that will come along.
Yeah, so Peter, how about this one? It's not going to make very much difference to somebody who enjoys the app because something else will come along to replace it. Equally, it could make very little difference to the authorities that want to get rid of it, because in doing so, they will just be pushing the water in the balloon to the other end and something else will come up that's pretty similar.
And yes, I think that's accurate. I think the dynamic that would be in place would be unfortunate. It would be telling companies that all you need to do is levy some vague security accusations against a competitor, and the fact that they come from a geopolitically unfavorable environment that is very close to its own citizens will win the day and win you bigger market share. I think that would be a really unfortunate lesson to come from this. And I also want to point out that while it may be starting with a conversation on TikTok, the reciprocity would be there. First of all, this would give reason for a response from China and others, and again lead to a more divided internet. And that flies in the face of kind of this beautiful creation, this machine for dissemination of information and ideas that we enjoy.
Zak and then Esther, perhaps the lesson the authorities need to learn is that if you keep the beast in plain sight, you might be able to control it better than if you tried to shut the door on it.
I mean, the debate here is very clear-cut, and I think Peter's point is interesting. China have already banned all of the US equivalents to TikTok. You can't use Facebook and Google and YouTube and Instagram, all these other things. In China, they have a firewall that prevents their use. The US is not going to go that far. It doesn't want to be seen as a media censor. But what's happened here is TikTok has raised a question that hasn't been raised before. How does the West deal with a Chinese social media application? We saw a backlash against FaceApp, which was a Russian application a year or so ago, for the same reasons. What do you do when an adversarial state puts social media in the pockets of your citizens? TikTok is asking the question in a way that even FaceApp did not. it needs
Okay,
to
so I'm going to go to Esther just to wrap this one up and maybe answer the question that you've put out there. What should the West do? What will the West do in response to something that's doing what's already happening in the West, but is coming from the other side of the world and is suspicious because of that?
So I think that there just needs to be greater accountability, and for the new, I guess, tech war, the battle lines have been drawn in the App Store, and until, by banning an app, the problem is just going to be repressed. And the West needs to think about any actions it takes to ban apps from adversaries, because it directly undermines the free and open internet that it is advocating for in so many diplomatic circles.
I thank you, each and every one of you. Much appreciated your time and your expertise on this program. Thank you. And big thank you to those of you who've taken the trouble to watch this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the team that made it possible, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.